Honest Hearts is the second Fallout DLC that was released in May and June of 2011 on all the platforms that New Vegas was available on. It sees the Courier travel to Zion National Park, where you obviously get embroiled in a war between tribes that will decide not only the physical fate of Zion and that of those who live there, but you also become the center of the fight for their very souls. And you might think I'm being overly dramatic, but stay a while and listen and you'll see what I mean. A quick programming note before we dive in: this video will have a little bit of extra lore thrown into it for those of you who might not have played the game or the DLCs yet and are interested in just a little bit more detail about the world and characters. Keep in mind, more lore doesn't mean story spoilers. In order to access this DLC, you first have to make your way to the Northern Passage and meet up with the Happy Trails caravan, where you find out they need some help for the long trek to Utah, and as long as you carry less than 100 pounds of stuff on you, you can go with them. The devs really couldn't pull that lose all your gear shit twice in a row, so instead they motivate the weight requirement by saying the trail takes you through some narrow canyons and high passes, and carrying lots of weight would be dangerous. Look, suspension of disbelief. It's a gaming convention. The fact that you can carry so much shit with you to begin with suspends disbelief to the highest degree. So it's cool, we'll go with it. This part of the DLC acts as both transition as well as a priming of sorts, introducing you to some of the basics that you're about to encounter, mentioning the name of Joshua Graham, and meeting Ricky, who comes from none other than...
Vault 2-2.
Ooh, Ricky. You're so fucked. So very, very fucked. And you can already start making decisions from before actually starting the DLC. You can call Ricky out on his bullshit, especially if you've been to Vault 22, and as it's been fairly well documented in the New Vegas video, I have. And you can either make him carry some of your stuff for the trip or simply tell him to leave. The first option is a nice roundabout way of you getting into Zion with more of your gear, but I chose not to do that because I actually enjoyed having to start from nothing in Dead Money. So having to reduce my gear to the bare essentials was a close second. Also, if you choose to not tell Ricky to get the fuck out in the Northern Passage, he gets to die fairly quickly. Yes, unfortunately, not long after your caravan reaches Zion, you're ambushed by some tribals and everyone else gets super killed while you're left to fend for yourself till you get some help from one of the peaceful tribes of Zion. Because the tribe that attacked the caravan, the Whitelegs, aren't natives of Zion, they are invaders. Anyway, you need help from the local tribes to find your way back to the Mojave because you won't be able to return the same way you came in, so that's how you get introduced into the plot. But before we get into all of that, I invite you to take a moment and feast your eyes upon the immensity of Zion and relish the contrast between it and the seemingly interminable flatness of the Mojave. That might seem like a weird thing to point out, but speaking as someone who has moved from a country with mountains to one whose highest point is 170 meters, that shit is more important than you think. I feel that Zion is more than simply the setting of this DLC. I feel it is the main character of the story, in the sense that it has a considerably larger importance and impact story-wise as well as exploration-wise, much more so than the villa and casino did in Dead Money. The first features you discover from the beginning are its vastness and verticality. There is really nothing like it in the base game, and that right there makes it a very special experience. The DLC really does its best to drive home this feeling, especially when you compare it to the narrow roads and ultra compactness of Dead Money. It is also due to this openness that Honest Hearts is also the most lenient area in the game when it comes to potential routes to your quest targets. With some very careful navigation, you can cut out a bunch of travel time by going down rock walls that would lead to your death if you try to do it in real life. Possibly the next thing you discover are the wall paintings made by the various tribes living here. At first glance, one might wish to connect them as a motif with the graffiti from Dead Money, but the markings in Honest Hearts tell wildly different stories, and more so they tell communal stories, not individual ones like in the previous DLC. They are a record of history for the tribes, as well as warnings of places where they should not tread upon because of their taboo nature. The very moment you drop into any body of water in Zion, you will notice that the water is safe to drink, which is impossible to find anywhere in the Fallout universe that we know of, with the exception of the post-Project Purity capital Wasteland. But in Zion, as you'll hopefully learn later, the winds that formed in the months after the bombs fell cleared most of the radiation away. Another unique thing that you'll see in Zion is the skies getting cloudy and rain falling. These types of weather effects are a minor thing, but they are very much welcomed, especially following the extreme dryness of the Mojave and hazy reddishness of the Sierra Madre. Zion is also the first place I saw creatures hunting, not simply fighting another creature. When I saw this Yao Guai was running after this baby gecko. And by the way, the geckos in Zion are badass motherfuckers that will jump you when you least expect it. Which leads me neatly into discussing the local fauna and flora. The animals are immensely aggressive and extremely dangerous. Even the big horners are uncommonly nasty if you mess with them. But the giant geckos, the Yao Guai and the Zion mantises really make exploring and questing through Zion much more of an adventure than you'd think. I left with the impression that I died way more times in Honest Hearts than during the base game, and I was over level 35 going in. Also, a good tip is to save before fast traveling, because sometimes the game will spawn creatures almost on top of you and you'll find yourself being very dead very fast. Check this out. So use fast travel with caution, is what I'm saying. In terms of the flora, Zion is the greenest region in the entire game for obvious reasons, and this means it also features a lot of things you can pick that you can then ingest, which will satiate both your hunger and thirst. Not to mention you gain access to some super useful recipes, but more on those later. So Zion is a character, at least in my view of things. But what about the actual NPCs that the DLC has to offer? There's a few NPCs that you can interact with, but the main ones are Joshua, Daniel, and your potential companions. So I'll focus on talking about them. Joshua and Daniel are the leading figureheads of the two peaceful tribes of Zion, the Dead Horses and the Sorrows. They are both Mormons who come from New Canaan, a settlement that was destroyed by the Whitelegs as a means for them to show their worth for Caesar's legion. Joshua was not in the settlement at the time of the attack, and Daniel managed to escape alongside the few other remaining survivors. They decided to regroup in Zion, and the Whitelegs eventually followed them here. These two have polar opposite approaches to dealing with the Whitelegs. Joshua is the connecting tissue between Honest Hearts and events in the base game. He is none other than Caesar's first legate. Even though the actual Latin term is legatus, for some reason they went with the anglicized version. The one who led the first assault on Hoover Dam, the failed one. As a result of his defeat, Caesar ordered to have him covered in tar, set alight and thrown into the Grand Canyon. He survived, mainly because the story required it, and he found himself spiritually reborn, and not long after that, due to his bandaged appearance, the legend of the Burned Man started to pop up across the Mojave wasteland. As war chief of the Dead Horses, he has been honing them into a proper fighting outfit, and he wants to bring retribution to the Whitelegs for the destruction of New Canaan. He is also the only trader in Zion and can repair weapons. Daniel, on the other hand, considers himself responsible for the Whitelegs coming into Zion, and as such wants to protect the Sorrows by moving them out. He follows the doctrine that Zion is more a state of mind than a physical place. The people bless the place, not the other way around sort of deal. But when it comes to the possible ending slides for Daniel, we find out that maybe he isn't totally convinced of this himself. Daniel is unwilling to wage war against the Whitelegs, but will not hesitate to kill them to defend the Sorrows. Honest Hearts will offer the option of having a companion with you all throughout its runtime. You start with Follows Chalk from the Dead Horses, whose companion perk is that he'll reveal several locations when you reach particular high places on the map, as well as improving your perception after that for a limited time. Nothing extraordinary, but cool nonetheless. My girl Waking Cloud, on the other hand, the companion from the Sorrows, is a bona fide beast. She will punch the shit out of anything on the map with her Yaoguai claw weapon.
This one is mine.
Her companion perk will make it easier to sneak up on the Whitelegs. Both have their own minor companion quests, but they're not that interesting to be honest. During the final part of the DLC, you can have Joshua Graham as a companion, which will grant you less spread and a higher chance of critical hits with any 45 type weapon. While he's your companion, he won't speak with you, trade, or repair your items. The conflict in the foreground of Honest Hearts is the one happening between Joshua and Daniel on one side and the Whitelegs on the other. At the same time, there is another conflict in the background of all of these events, the philosophical conflict between Joshua and Daniel in terms of what they each want to do in regards to the inevitable invasion from the Whitelegs. But those aren't the most important things that you get out of this DLC. At least they weren't for me. The fact that Ricky had a Vol 22 jumpsuit on isn't just a funny little reference and callback to something from the base game, it's actually the setup for what you find in Zion. It starts fairly early on, when you find this giant wall painting showing a large figure and a rifle seemingly killing a lot of number 22s. Remember what I said in my New Vegas video? Some of the population made it out of the vault before the fungal fecal matter impacted the air oscillation unit. Well, this is where you pick up that trail and also where that trail ends. Long before you find them, you get a nice little hint from Follows Chalk.
The spitter plants and the green monster men aren't native to Zion. Wonder where they came from.
And then you start finding them. The same spore carriers and spitting plants you know come from Vault 22. You discover a couple of campsites where you can see the skeletal remains of many Vault dwellers. Something or someone obviously killed a lot of them, maybe all of them. And then you find a truly mysterious log entry in one of their bags. A log entry that talks about some form of vengeful spirit of the canyons that's been killing them relentlessly for 11 months, whittling them down from 118 to just 34. A spirit that uses guns and explosives, but a spirit nonetheless, because if it would have been a man, they would have caught him by now. The giant wall painting kinda makes more sense now, doesn't it? The remaining 34 left Zion and were lost to the wasteland. And we won't hear of Vault 22 beyond this video ever again. Or will we? Odds are that by the time you find the Vault 22 camp, you've already been introduced to the Father in the Cave, the Sorrow's guiding spirit. Certain caves around Zion are marked by them as taboo, since they are holy to the Father in the Cave. Whoever went inside has never returned. When you go into the first one, you understand why no one returned. The taboo caves are all filled with all manner of traps that will require some pretty careful navigation to disarm. However, in each of the caves, you will reach a base camp of sorts, generally with a cooking fire, sometimes with a workbench or reloading bench, plenty of useful supplies, but always with a still functioning terminal. By accessing these terminals, you start finding out about Randall Clark, a survivalist ex-soldier who was returning home to his family from a camping trip when the bombs fell. He was driving home when his truck stopped, and so did the other cars around him. Recognizing the telltale signs of an EMP, he knew what was about to happen and likely took cover. He was lucky not to be looking at the direction of the flashes. They were so close that they blinded a couple in a nearby car. He grabbed his rifle and bag and hiked to Zion, where he found refuge in a cave used by the United States Geological Survey, who left in a hurry, leaving behind gear and supplies. As you explore each of the forbidden caves, you read more and more of his observations about the world outside rapidly changing because of the immense quantities of radiation, and more poignantly of his survivor's guilt, because he wasn't there when his family died. We find out from him that the first group of people to find refuge in Zion was a group of Mexicans, but they were later massacred and eaten by the survivors from Vault 22. That's when he took it upon himself to exterminate the assholes in blue suits, as he calls them. He also made note of their heavy coughing and speculated that they might have tuberculosis. And we know how that ended from the log we found earlier in the Vault 22 camp. The story of Randall Clark only gets more tragic after this point, but despite him constantly contemplating suicide, for reasons he still did not understand until his final day, he did not do it. Which meant that he was still around when a group of children found their way into Zion. He would listen to them from afar and hear them talk about a school and an evil principal they escaped from, and he decided that he would teach them how to survive and thrive in Zion. They were literate, so he started leaving out books of stories for them, and then followed those with useful manuals on survival skills, as well as notes that he would sign the father. That's how he became the father in the cave. He does eventually die, and you can find his corpse if you spend some time looking around Zion.
O Father, guide and protect us, your humble children, as we labor in the vineyards, and make us strong to resist those who would steal Zion from us.
But it's gonna be faster to just look up where you can find them on the internet. New Vegas takes place in 2281, and Randall dies in 2124. That means that the legend of the father in the cave has been going for 157 years by the time you showed up. 6 or 7 generations grew up with his teachings at their spiritual core. With these teachings, I tell them to read and to learn and to make the most of their new home. I tell them that I'm giving them Zion as a gift to make up for all the sorrows of their lives so far and all the sorrows man has visited on man. I tell them to be kind to each other and modest. I tell them never to hurt each other, but that if someone else comes along and tries to hurt them, to strike back with righteous anger. Stuff like that. I sign every note, the father. Because, well, just because. The Father in the Cave, or The Survivalist, is by far the best thing in Honest Hearts. And it's quite possibly the one story that really stands out in an entire game of dark, depressing, and dubious stories. Not because it isn't those things, because it is, but because it doesn't end that way. It ends with a man who needed to live the life that he lived in order to understand why he never had the guts to kill himself. And I, for one, find a lot of comfort in that. And now it's time for Stefan's Miscellaneous Musings. The airplane crash. One of the more intriguing things that you notice from the beginning of the DLC when you first get to scan the vastness of Zion is what looks to be the fuselage of a crashed airplane on top of some cliffs. This was something I forgot existed in the DLC, so I made a mental note to check it out before finishing up the main quest. Even though you can still hang around Zion after you're done with the main quest and actually return to it from the base game, which is something you can't do with the Sierra Madre. It turns out you can't actually reach it, which is a bit of a bummer, but it also goes to show how important it can be to sometimes check some stuff on the internet before investing too much time into it. You can, however, explore the surroundings and you'll find a piece of the plane and what I can only imagine more passengers that either fell from it or survivors who made it down the cliff to then be very quickly taken out by the highly aggressive Zion wildlife. Picking ingredients. I mentioned earlier that plants are quite abundant in Zion, as opposed to the rest of the Mojave, and I want to add that picking them is super simple and easy. Not only that, but Honest Hearts comes with some really nice plant-based recipes that will not only offer you some very useful anti-venom and limb repair solutions, because doctor's bags aren't a thing in Zion, but will also allow you to make your own Nuka-Cola and Sunset Sarsaparilla. And if that's not value, I don't know what is. The Ghost of She quest. Holy tripping balls, Batman! This is one of the more supernaturally tinged quests in the Fallout universe. You are in an altered state when undertaking the quest, so one could argue that the flaming body of the Yao Guai isn't real, that is just a projection of your whacked out brain. But considering the thing can spontaneously multiply at a certain point, but still dies to bullets, and the fact that there's been supernatural elements in the game since at least Fallout 2, the flames might as well be real. Anyway, it's a cool quest that you shouldn't miss. Overall, the Fallout plotlines start as a personal quest and continue with you getting embroiled to steadily escalating levels of what can only be concisely described as high-stakes political machinations. Or machinations, I'm not sure. True, you may be shooting up super mutants, fiends, or giant ants.
Hey mister, how much for the giant ant?
But you can generally just as well create alliances and talk people out or into doing something that aligns with someone else's interest. All of these plotlines culminate with fairly epic and superhuman conclusions. You defeat the Master and its army of Gen 1 super mutants, defeat the Enclave again, and decide to clean the water of an entire geographical region. Truly paradigm-shifting events on a fairly massive scale. New Vegas kinda follows the same overall concept, but balances things differently, putting more weight on the personal quest part and a bit less on your world-changing effects, because what's happening in the Mojave will most likely stay in the Mojave. Neither the NCR nor the Legion could expand to such an extent so as to affect the Capital Wasteland or the Commonwealth, and what you are working with is basically a localized, even if very involved and brutal, conflict. While the fate of Hoover Dam is indeed important, it doesn't feel as objectively epic as the things you accomplish in Fallouts 1 through 3. 4 is gonna be discussed in a much farther future on my channel. Honest Hearts, though, manages to blend the personal quest and epic scale in a distinct way. By taking away the grand actors and thrusting you into a small-scale version of the conflict that is being played out in the base game. Doing this, as well as focusing on Daniel and Joshua as the representatives of the participating tribes, makes the conflict in Honest Hearts seem more personal than the fight between the NCR and Caesar's Legion, while at the same time, your effect on the status quo of the Valley is undoubtedly epic, since Zion has been the tribal character's entire world for generations. But this is where I feel an opportunity was missed. An opportunity to explore both Daniel and Joshua in more depth and have more meaningful discussions about religion, colonialism, geopolitical power struggles, and their effects on the people on the ground. I mean, there is a quest in Honest Hearts called Civilized Man's Burden, which those of you who are literature geeks out there will recognize as a reference to Rudyard Kipling's poem White Man's Burden, in which he argues for the United States to take colonial control of the Philippines. This from the same guy who wrote fairly universally liked works of fiction like Jungle Book and Kim, the latter of which inspired the game that is really interesting and which I reviewed a long time ago. In this case, it's only used as a title reference, but once you are aware of that, you cannot not see the more meaningful discussion that could have been had around these dudes with Western values and beliefs coming to uplift the natives, but ending up instead bringing their own conflicts upon them. Joshua's reaction to the massacre of New Canaan has made him into a specter of pure vengeance, keenly focused on bringing retribution upon the Whitelegs for the destruction of his people. He looks outside of himself for the problem and inside for the solution. But in doing so, he's blind to the fact that he's becoming a religious version of Caesar, the one under whom he previously became something antithetical to his belief. But that's pretty much where his character stops. Daniel's response to having survived through the massacre is the opposite of Joshua's. He is racked with guilt for underestimating the Whitelegs and for the fate of his pastor. He looks inside for the problem and finds the solution on the outside. In this case, the solution is to protect the Saros from the doom he has brought upon them by moving them outside of Zion into the wilderness where the Whitelegs simply cannot survive, because all they know is war. But just like with Joshua, that's where his character stops. Depending on the decisions you make during the game, each of them will have different degrees of closure, but the various ending slides tell a little bit more about the conflicted nature of both of them, and that's why I think this could have been a much meatier DLC. Obviously, approaching this sort of discourse would have proven to be way heavier than what its audience was looking for. But a geek can dream, right? And since I mentioned geeks, how about we get another perspective on Honest Hearts as well? Introducing my friend Randolph, whom you might recognize from his Dead Money cameo. Randolph, old chum, the floor is yours.
Honest Hearts is not the game I rank the highest when it comes to Fallout New Vegas' expansions, because it's not good and I rank the expansions as objectively as I can. I look at the setting, graphics, narrative, what gameplay mechanics they play with and their impact on the main story and the world of the Mojave Wasteland. When I review it like that, it ranks the lowest on my list, but when reviewed according to which DLC I think about the most and the one I found the most memorable, it ranks number 1, because it does something. The Fallout series as a whole is known for its shades of grey, and that's mostly horseshit because the series never really plays with that. In New Vegas' main story, the shades of grey quote unquote are the main factions of the game. But they're not really grey. The NCR is the good guy faction. Yes, it's largely the good guy faction because the other factions range from bad to Nazis. But it's still the good guy faction. They're still the good guys, even though they have committed war crimes. But in Honest Hearts you do get shades of grey. Well, you get one shade of grey. Joshua Graham. He's the main character of the DLC and he's portrayed as kind of a good guy who is on a crusade and he is sent by God and all that. And when I'm playing Honest Hearts, I'm on his side because he's the good guy, but he's not. The only difference between him and Miscellaneous is that Joshua has failed the mission that the main story is setting up. He lost the Battle of Hoover Dam and he was punished by Kaiser. But he's not a good guy. He was a Legion commander who held the same position that Miscellaneous is holding now. And through that, we can reasonably conclude that he was just as ruthless as Miscellaneous. He murdered, he pillaged, he tortured. He just wasn't good enough at murdering, pillaging and torturing, and so he was punished. The game portrays him as a good guy because the bad guy set him on fire. But the bad guy set him on fire because he was shit at his job, which was being the bad guy. I know this every time I boot up Honest Hearts, but I still want to be his friend and help him because he was set on fire by the sports equipment Nazi. And that's what Honest Hearts does, and that's why I find it interesting. Even though it's a boring DLC that's way too long, even though it's not that long and it's paced badly and the story is dumb. Thanks for letting me hijack this video for a few minutes and talk about why Joshua Graham is best girl, even though he is a LARPing wasteland Nazi that was bad at his job and doesn't deserve salvation.
Thank you for your input, you druid looking Dane. Honest Hearts was honestly cooler than I remembered it. It is a missed opportunity, like I said earlier, but it also features the answer to a mystery left over from the base game, as well as one of the most compelling stories in the entire game, if not the entire franchise. But now, let's look into our near future, and if you think you know what's coming, you might be wrong. Because I will not be singing the old world blues just yet. Instead, I'll make a video about modding New Vegas for the first time, because the process of modding it was a very interesting and learning experience in its own self. But till then, you tell me in the comments what you thought about Honest Hearts, and also if you enjoy this deep dive format that I'm experimenting with. Hey there, dear watcher who's still watching, thanks for sticking around. I've started a Patreon page, and if you'd like to and can throw a couple of bucks my way to help me get more games and better recording equipment, go on there and check out the tiers and rewards. If you can't do that but you would still want to help my channel grow, consider subscribing, liking the video, sharing it obviously, and don't forget to click that bell notification after you subscribe. It's really important. I've been Stefan Nonsense, thank you very much for watching. Have a great rest of your day and see you next time.